How much lift do you need on your truck? Practically everyone with a four-wheel drive rig wants to lift it, put the big tires on it, make it look good and perform well. But the question really is, how much do you need? What maybe a better question is, what do you plan to do with the rig? Obviously, if you're going to drive in mud bogs or do rock climbing, you're going to need a different setup than if you're doing overlanding. In this video, we're going to talk about lift from an overland perspective and not from an off-roading specialized perspective. First concept that we need to talk about is ground clearance, and where does that come from? Lift doesn't really affect your ground clearance. It can help you with your approach and departure angles and your breakover angle, but ground clearance is more a function of your tire size and where your axles are located and how they're built. You can see from this diagram that even though the truck has been lifted, ground clearance is affected by the axle and the suspension components. We're talking about overlanding, we're talking about going places, whether it's on or off the highway. We're not talking about just going out and running around in the rocks or a mud pit for a day, but actually trying to get to certain destinations, make a trip out of it. And that's the concept we'll use for this video. People build their 4x4s into specific rigs. There's hill climbing and there's mud bogging. There's all sorts of rock type buggies that go out to Moab and things like that. And an overlander is a different machine. It really needs to be more of an all-around performer, but not specialized in any one thing. Here are a couple of good examples of overland rigs that are very capable, have plenty of ground clearance and sufficient tires. And because they are so capable, they've basically adopted a position, captured a position at the top of the heap for overland type vehicles. One of the things you might notice about those is that they're not extreme. They don't have 40-inch tires, they don't have 6-inch lifts, and in fact some of the most capable off-road or overland vehicles in the world were the Camel Trophy trucks. If you've ever paid attention to the Camel Trophy races, you know that they went through obstacles that most of us would have nightmares about. And they did it all in these trucks that had about 2 inches of lift and about a 33-inch tire. They were skinnier tires than most of us like to use too, which was interesting. So the answer to the first question of how much lift do you need might be that you need about 2 inches, maybe 3. But you certainly don't need to go more than that. If the Camel Trophy trucks didn't need more than that, why do we? In fact, when you start lifting a truck over 3 inches, you start changing things in the suspension and the driveline, and the enhanced angles and stresses start making you redesign pieces of the truck. You have to replace components and add things. And we all know how, from our young days as a kid, how the more you modify the truck, the less reliable it gets. So for us, in an overlanding context, reliability should be more important, and we want to preserve as much of the factory reliability as we can. Minimum modifications also mean minimum expense, which is helpful to all of us. So when I was a kid, most of our four-wheel drive rigs looked like this. We put bigger tires than we needed on them, and they were fairly capable, but there was a lot of stress on the driveline, and you would get differentials break or shocks break. Most standard vehicles aren't really built for the stress of these big tires, 38, 40-inch tires. You see a lot of Wranglers running around on 40-inch tires, and those break a lot. People complain about their Jeep not having the reliability they want. But if you've got 40-inch tires on a light-duty 4x4, what do you expect? So we're going to be talking about lift, and yet here we are talking about tire size. Why is that? Because ultimately your ground clearance comes from your tires. The bigger the tire and wheel combination you have on the rig, it raises the axle up, which is the limiting factor of your ground clearance. And so if you have a 32-inch tire, your center of your axle is at 16 inches above the ground, which would give you approximately 16 inches of ground clearance, except for things that hang below the axle, like your suspension mounts and your differentials. Check out this photo of a Jeep and its undercarriage, and you can see that some of those things do hang down and impede or impact your ground clearance. Stock Wranglers come with about 8.5 inches of ground clearance, and if they have an enhanced tire or suspension package, that's increased slightly. Other trucks like the Land Cruiser come with almost a foot. And in this picture you can see the undercarriage of the truck is very smooth. It doesn't have those things that hang down. So the engineers put a lot of time and effort into designing ground clearance into that vehicle, even with the standard tires that came with it. So the first aspect that we need to consider for lift is what we're going to be doing with the rig, what kind of terrain we're going to be going over, and therefore how much ground clearance do we need. And we pick our tire size accordingly. In my experience, I've found that 33-inch tires are sufficient for just about everything. We used to run the Rubicon trails with 31s, right? We don't need 40-inch tires on most vehicles. So for my money, I'd say 31 to 33 inches fine. Some guys prefer to go up to about 35, and that's fine. If that's what you like, go ahead. It will gain you another inch or so of ground clearance over the 33s. There probably isn't really much reason to go above a 35 unless it's just something you want to do. And if you want to do that and start redesigning your truck and modifying more and more, well, that's a valid thing to do. But in an overlanding context, again, we're trying to maintain reliability and fuel economy and things like that, as we talked about. And so minimum modifications are usually the best. I personally don't like to over-modify. I think a 33-inch tire is just fine. On my truck, to run 33s, I had to lift it to keep them from rubbing. And that's where the lift on the truck comes in. Once you've decided your tire and your ground clearance requirements and you get what you need, then you lift your truck just enough to make sure that the tire doesn't rub on your suspension components or in the fenders. You make those modifications also on a minimal basis. And that's usually a 2 to 3 inch lift will suffice, and that's usually enough. We talked about the Camel Trophy trucks a minute ago, and if you look at these pictures of the Camel Trophy course and these trucks, you can see that they are hitting some extreme terrain and conditions with 2 to 3 inches of lift and 33-inch tires. That seems to work for them. If it works for them, it'll work for us. So there are two basic kinds of lift, a body lift and a suspension lift. For the purpose of this discussion, it doesn't really matter which one you use. It might be specific to your truck or to the tire combination that you're trying to run, but as long as it gives you clearance for the tires without them rubbing, it will suffice in an overlanding context. The idea of this video is to get us talking about lift and get ideas flowing. So what I'm going to do now is open it up to comments down below. If you have something that you'd like to say or a perspective that you want to share, just put it in there, and let's get those comments going back and forth. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel if this is useful to you. And let's talk lift tonight.